Joining us now, talking about the Detroit Lions and covering them for the Pride of Detroit, our good friend Jeremy Reisman. Jeremy, my man, what's going on? Happy Thirsty Thursday to you, my friend. How are you, partner?
I'm doing well, Anthony. Good to hear from you. How you been?
I'm really good, actually. I'm fantastic at this juncture of the day because it feels like we have survived an offseason in which, coming off of the 2022 season for the Detroit Lions, we thought that maybe we would see some of our coaching staff members get poached, and we actually survived relatively unscathed.
Yeah. And it's nice, too, because it does feel like things are just kind of getting started here, and to kind of lose big chunks of that coaching staff that have been so critical to the turnaround this early in the rebuild and the renaissance, whatever you want to call it, would have been maybe not a killer step back, but it would have been a step back that they would have had to recover from. So it's certainly nice to see a lot of friendly faces come back.
You know, I really did feel like Ben Johnson, when the interviews were first getting started, we knew that Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson, because of the success that this defense had in the second half under AG and Ben Johnson, and how this offense was just putting up 30 points basically on command, it did kind of feel like, okay, one of them's going to leave, like at some point. And then Ben Johnson decided that, hey, I'm not going to take any more interviews. I'm gonna go back. I don't know what really spawned that, what was the real reason behind that, but basically saying out loud that I want to finish kind of what we started here. That being the first domino to fall, I felt really, really secure. Even if the Lions would have lost defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn, I did feel confident with Ben Johnson at least coming back that there would be head coach and one of the coordinators there. I felt like, from a stability standpoint, that was really a step in the right direction first.
Oh yeah, that was huge. Getting Ben Johnson, I think, was maybe the biggest offseason move they're going to make all year, and that might even include the first round picks in the draft. Honestly, he's been so critical to what the Lions have been able to do offensively, and it really started in 2021, right? When he kind of took an elevated role once the Lions moved on from Anthony Lynn. And, you can just see it. You can see his impact on some of the brilliant plays that he calls, on some of the fun trick plays that work. You don't know how much is necessarily him with the improvement of Jared Goff. I mean, you have to give Goff obviously a lot of credit to that, but I think there was also a concern there too, where, Goff had a breakout season. Would he continue to have that sort of success if Ben Johnson wasn't there? So luckily we won't need to know that answer, at least this year. I think, he had a really good interview with Tim Twentyman this week and talked about some of the reasons why he came back and why Detroit felt so special to him. He mentioned how he was at a Garth Brooks concert at Ford Field and was like, this is a crazy atmosphere. It's going to be this crazy when the Lions finally get a home playoff game. And that seems to kind of be a running theme with a lot of these coaches. Like they sense that Detroit is on the verge of something special, that the city has been starving for a good football team, and they want to see it through and see what happens when they get there.
And that's such a beautiful thing, and because the energy was palpable this season. I mean, you were there, yeah. You saw it, you could feel it, you heard the noise. It's like the Jacksonville game. The crowd got quiet, and my boss is looking at me down on the field, and he's going, "What do you think it is?" I was like, "I think people are just shocked that this game is so out of hand that we're not used to bludgeoning people like this. We are just taking them to the woodshed." And then we had this Cardinals vacancy that finally, I think maybe everybody can, collectively exhale as they hire Jonathan Gannon. So we should be all set now. Everybody comes back. Aaron Glenn returns. He might be somewhat personally disappointed, but at the same time sort of excited that he gets the opportunity to continue to build what they have going on in Detroit as well. When you looked at Aaron Glenn in some of the interviews that he got and the potential of him leaving, what this means for this defense moving forward that just took a huge step in that second half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about stability, right? And consistency, and that's what you need on defense. That's what you really need on every part of the game, and bringing him back is huge. I know he still very much has a lot to prove as an offensive coordinator. I don't think the defense, even by the end of the season, is where they want it to be. But Aaron Glenn has said it multiple times. He wants to be the best he wants to be the best coordinator, I think he said, in Detroit Lions history. And listen, last year it felt like a transition year, because I know a lot of people say, well, it was year two, like he should have built upon year one. But one thing that him and Dan Campbell kept reiterating to the media was, that defense in 2022 was nothing like the defense in 2021. There was really only two starters carried over from year one to year two, and that was Alex Anzalone and Ali McNeil. Everyone else around them was new. And so now you're entering 2023, and, you probably expect 7, 8, or 9 of those guys back, if not more. And so that sort of stability is going to help Aaron Glenn, I think. And I think Aaron Glenn sticking around and kind of running the same defense and all those young players on defense, knowing what's expected of them. The consistency works on both sides, right? It helps Aaron Glenn and it helps the players. And so I think it's reasonable to expect at the very least for them to pick up where they were when they left off at the end of last season, because you're right, like they made a big significant turnaround there, Carolina game excluded, that helped them win games. I mean, they held Aaron Rodgers to 9 points in the first game, and how much was it in the finale? Not, I think they only scored 1 touchdown in that game. So it really was a promising end of the season, and now that most of the pieces are coming back, I think you can expect them to hit the ground running in 2023.
Jeremy, when that news came out, and by the way, if you're not following him already, what are you doing with your life? Visit him on Twitter, Detroit Online, and then argue with him there about why you should be the GM of the Detroit Lions. We love that kind of stuff on Twitter. But, Jeremy, I look at the loss that this staff did have, and that was Deuce Staley. And for Deuce Staley to go to Carolina, I don't know the full background story. I know that there is a family member with some health issues. He is, he grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, so he can be closer to his mother. He played at USC, no, not the Trojans, but the other USC, the Gamecocks, before having a decade-long run there with the Philadelphia Eagles. Frank Reich and he worked together before in Philadelphia as a part of that Super Bowl title 2017 season. He goes to Carolina. It kind of felt shocking, but it also kind of felt like the Lions staff knew that there was something greater than football going on here. So, yeah, go have a conversation. If you want to go, you can go.
Yeah, and that felt like a very classy move from the Lions, and I think most franchises would do something similar. But he takes a completely lateral move. He's basically the same title that he had here in Detroit. He's assistant head coach, running backs coach, and you have to imagine that most of that decision was spurned by the family issue. And I don't want to get too much into that. It's obviously a personal issue for him, but it seemed like he had a classy exit. Taylor Decker spoke on a local podcast and mentioned how he called everyone on the offense individually and told them the situation. And, he was just as committed to seeing this turnaround, I think, in Detroit as anyone on that coaching staff, but sometimes there are more important things in football. And so good on the Lions for letting him go and good on Deuce to making sure that his priorities are straight. And, I do think the Lions got quite a replacement in Scotty Montgomery, a guy who is will be an offensive coordinator, I think, in this league, coming from the Colts, where he obviously did a phenomenal job with guys like Jonathan Taylor and has the experience as a former player too. So he kind of checks all the boxes of what the Lions look for in that position. And so now, if you do lose Ben Johnson, I know we've all kind of been circling Tanner Engstrom as the guy who's going to take over as offensive coordinator. When Ben Johnson eventually leaves, I think the Lions have another option now in Scotty Montgomery, and it looks like, he's staying after. I know he was in competition for the Bucs offensive coordinator job. Last year he was a finalist for the Panthers offensive coordinator job, I believe. So this guy has a very bright future, and so, you're definitely going to miss Deuce. He has quite the relationship with a lot of players in those locker rooms, but you hope that Scotty Montgomery can come in and build some relationships pretty quickly himself.
Jeremy, do you believe, staying in the running backs room, do you think that the Lions make a move here, whether in free agency or at the draft, to maybe change that room around a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the first decision has to be made on Jamal Williams, and I think everyone's expectation is that he's going to come back just because there's obviously going to be a lot of mutual interest. He meant so much to the leadership in that room, and obviously he performed on the field too, right? Sets the franchise record for rushing touchdowns in season, crosses over 1,000 yards for the first time in a while in this franchise. But beyond that, there has to be at least a thought about looking towards the future, because DeAndre Swift rookie contract is coming to an end after this upcoming season. And at this point, I don't know if the expectation would be to re-sign him. So you have to start looking. You don't necessarily have to make the move this year. Running back is one of those positions where you can make an immediate impact. So if you want to run it back with the crew you had last year, I think you could. But the Lions have a lot of draft capital, and there are some interesting names in this draft class. So I'd be surprised if they dive into free agency. this year, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them potentially draft a guy either on, day 2 or day 3.
Now, speaking of free agency, we can go there next before we go into the draft. Is there a guy or a position that you believe that the Lions should take a look at within this free agent class upcoming that you think would be a nice addition to this team?
Yeah, I mean, I think the conversation has to start at corner. I always kind of go by the idea of free agency is to make sure that you don't have to reach in the draft. Make it so that you have playable starters at every single position, and that's not always easy to do. But I think the Lions are starting to get in a position where they can knock out pretty much all their needs in free agency and then just go into the draft and go, hey, let's just go for the best player available. And you look at the Lions roster right now, and corner is, I think, by far the biggest concern. You don't really know where you are with Jeff Okudah, who essentially got benched towards the end of last year. Outside of that, you really only have Jerry Jacobs and Chase Lucas signed to the roster. So you got to get it figured out there. I think you need to add at least one starter, maybe even a nickel starter in free agency. I don't necessarily have any particular names in mind yet, but I think that's a position you really have to look at. Depending on who you bring back, I think maybe defensive tackle is another position you need to look at. I know a lot of people are circling Daron Payne as a potential target. He's going to be pretty expensive, but he is young, and he does bring a lot of disruption up the middle of the defensive line, which is something the Lions have been missing for quite some time. So I think those are probably the two positions you at least circle and say, hey, let's see what we can do in free agency to kind of ease up our big board when it comes to draft day. But yeah, no, I don't have any specifics yet that are my guys necessarily.
And anytime somebody says going to be pretty expensive, I'm like that Dave Chappelle gif where he's got the crown on his head and he's holding all his money and he doesn't want to. That's how it's not even my money, it's collectively our cap space. So I get
Right.
We start talking about expensive. We start talking about $10 million or more a year. I start panicking. I'm looking at numbers.
Yeah.
I'm like, what about signing bonuses? How do we make all this work? Another guy, money wise, that they're going to have to look at. You already mentioned Jamal Williams, mutual interest there. What about a guy like DJ Chark?
Yeah, and I'm just kind of working on a piece on him because that's another, I think, really.
Ooh, it's a teaser, folks. Got to stay tuned. PrideOfDetroit.com.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation. He really kind of shined towards the end of last season and brought a dimension to the game that the Lions have been missing in the deep ball, and it really started to show up at the end of the last season. But at the same time, you got Jameson Williams waiting in the wings, and he's also going to bring that dimension to your offense. And so you have to wonder. First, you have to wonder how much DJ is going to be looking for, right? They gave him $10 million last year, and they're actually going to incur about $6 million of that cap hit this year from the way the contract was structured. And so if he's asking to be a lot, I mean, the Lions are kind of deep at the position right now. You got guys that can contribute in Josh Reynolds, in Amon-Ra, in Jameson Williams, and even Khalif Raymond. And so, you want as many weapons as you can. I don't think you can really – it's almost like edge rusher, right? As many – passing threats in the league in the way it's played right now, the more you can get, the better. But it's going to be a crowded room. So I haven't personally made a decision on what I want yet, but I think it's maybe one of the more difficult decisions they'll have because he's also a good culture fit, right? He's a guy that also wants to be back, but he's a guy that's also dealt with injuries. And so can you trust that? I don't think they can afford to bring him back on a $10 million deal like they did last year. But I think there will be mutual interest if it can be a much more affordable deal. But I don't know if that's what DJ is looking for at this point in his career. He's probably nearing the part of his career where he has maybe one or two more paydays in his career, and so maybe he wants to cash in.
You can't knock him for it either. If somebody wants to pay me $10 million, I'm headed out there. Where are we going? I'll go to the Yukon territory if you need me to. Whatever I got to do to make that $10 million, I'm out the door. All right, Jeremy. When we look forward to the draft, a lot of mock drafts out there. Mel Kiper's going to be out there. He's going to have all the hair. He's going to be talking about length, coach's kid, all that good stuff. Sneaky, athletic, quick twitch. It's another buzzword for you. Outside of all of that, I know Mel's already said Will Levis is his number one quarterback. We are going to take phone calls on why the Lions should take quarterback with their first pick from we've already been taking them. So it's just going to continue on. It's going to happen. I don't subscribe to that. Where are you with the two Detroit Lions draft picks in that first round? If they stay where they're at 6 and 18, what direction would you like to see them go?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easy answer is defense. Get as many playmakers as you can on that side of the ball. You certainly added a couple last offseason, and we saw that make its impact towards the end of last year. James Houston and Hayden Hutchinson were a tear, and so maybe now you fix up that back end. If you don't get the guys that you want in free agency, the Lions, like I said, I mean, they not only need current starters as cornerbacks, they need guys for the future, because again, you got Jeff Okudah and his 5th-year option decision coming in May, and who else do you really trust there to be the long-term guy? Jerry Jacobs is a great story, but I don't know if his ceiling is number one cornerback. So again, that remains kind of a main need. I will say, and not to drum up the light up the phone lines here, I do think quarterback at least has to be in consideration here, because and nothing against Jared Goff, but eventually you're either going to have to pay him in the next 2 years or decide to move on from him. And so you're in a good spot here where if you think that that franchise changing quarterback is in this draft class, and I'm not saying there is or isn't, you have to consider it. And it's a tough decision. It's going to be an unpopular decision by some people's measures. And I, you hate to bring up the biggest exception to the rule or the biggest name, but the Lions almost do kind of find themselves in that Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes situation where, yeah, they look pretty good right now. But is Jared Goff the elite level of quarterback in this league? I think most people would agree the answer is no there. So if there is one available, I don't think there's anything wrong with at least entertaining that idea. That being said, I'm fully in the bag of getting defense right now. I don't know if that guy is going to be there at 6. I don't know if that elite talent is going to be there at 18. I know Anthony Richardson is a popular name, and I'm not quite convinced of that yet. So I like the corners in this draft. I think there's going to be multiple options, whether it's at 6 or 18. And then, at some point they're going to have to address guard as well. I think they're bringing all their starters back, but you have to wonder about the future of someone like Vaitai. 18 might be a little early for guard, but it's also, if you want the best one in the class, I think 18 is maybe a spot that you at least consider it.
Jeremy Reisman with a couple of teases there, right? He dangled the article, and then the big carrot there for quarterback, just to reel you in. Find him on Twitter at Detroit Online. Jeremy, my friend, as always, partner, thank you so much for your time waking up with us this morning, my man. We greatly appreciate it.
No problem, Anthony. Appreciate you.